Okay, so we are live on live stream. We got that taken care of. Good evening, everybody. Hopefully everybody picked up papers when they came in. If you did not, go ahead and get those real quick right now before we get into the lesson itself if you want them. Caleb is our mic guy tonight, so if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand. Caleb will come to you so that we get your question on the microphone. Apologies for not being here on Sunday. You would not have wanted me here on Sunday. You would not have wanted to be anywhere around me on Sunday. But what that did, besides the fact that it made my morning miserable, afternoon not so bad, but morning was pretty miserable. But what that did for us was it got us one more class behind, right? Okay, so, but the good thing is, at the end of the class, it's all topics, so I can just delete whatever topic I don't want to discuss, and we'll go on, all right? But tonight and Sunday, we're talking about something that we are not going to delete because this is one of the reasons why we have an intertestamental period class, okay? Is because there are some biblical texts that are tied very closely to the intertestamental period. And specifically tonight, we're going to be looking at some that are in the book of Daniel. Tonight and Sunday, we're going to be looking at some that are in the book of Daniel. We've got 3 chapters in Daniel tonight that we need to look at, so we're going to see if we can get all that managed this evening before we run out of time. Daniel's prophecies of the period, okay? We're probably familiar with one of these prophecies that we're going to talk about. We are less familiar with the other 2, okay? As we look at the book of Daniel, it would really help if I had my clicker. That's my problem right now. I'm sorry. I had everything ready to go except my clicker, and it's up here. I hope. Yes. So we look at the book of Daniel. We look at the prophecies in Daniel. There are several prophecies that are found in the book of Daniel. They're all, for the most part, found in chapters 7 through 12. Yes, I know we get some earlier in the book. We're going to look at one of those this evening. But the ones that really talk about the intertestamental period in an in-depth way are found in chapters 7 through 12. And so most of the time in these 2 classes, that's where we're going to be. A detailed discussion of these prophecies simply is not possible in the confines of this class, okay? I do teach the book of Daniel. I teach it in conjunction with the book of Ezekiel. So it usually ends up being a 2-quarter class because Ezekiel is really, really long. Daniel, not so much. But when I teach at any rate, Daniel, it's a part of Ezekiel. We go into a little bit more depth in the prophecies, okay? We just can't do that in this particular class because this class is not a class on Daniel, okay? It's on the intertestamental period. So we are going to have a limited and fairly quick overview of the prophecy. So if you'll go ahead and take your Bibles and go to Daniel chapter 2, this is the one that, of all the prophecies that we're going to look at, this is the one that's most familiar to all of us, okay? Probably because Daniel chapter 2 is in the first part of the book, chapters 1 through 6, and we go through those stories quite a bit because they were great stories for our children, right? That's where they pop up in our children's Bible classes, and sometimes they pop up in sermons as well. It's unfortunate that Daniel chapters 1 through 6 get treated in that way because God did not write those chapters for the children's classes, okay? They are written for adults primarily and children by extension. But we tend to be familiar with this particular chapter because it's in that section of the book that we're more familiar with. All right, Daniel chapter 2 is set in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar. That puts us in 603/602 BC, okay? Their year's not exactly corresponding to ours. The best we can say is 603/602. That is not the intertestamental period, okay? That's firmly in the biblical period, Nebuchadnezzar's reign. However, remember, in this class we expand the intertestamental period to catch some of these other things in order to lay the groundwork for the intertestamental period. So that's the dating of it, the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar. He is, of course, king of the Babylonian Empire, and he's king in Babylon. He's got some young men that are there. Who are those young men? Shout it out. Don't be afraid. Don't need the mic for that. Okay, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel is there, all right? So these 3 figure in prominently in those stories. Daniel, most of all, especially if you take the second half of the book. The king has a dream. That dream disturbs him. The king's dream is revealed to Daniel, and the interpretation. Okay, remember Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. He wants someone to give him interpretation of the dream. All the wise men say, we can't do that. You tell us what the dream is, and we'll give you the interpretation. No, Nebuchadnezzar's not having any of that. So in the end, you get Daniel having the dream revealed to him as well as the interpretation. We remember, don't we, what the statue is? There's the head of gold. You see it illustrated over there on the right side. The chest and arms are made of silver. The middle and thighs are made of bronze. And then the legs are made of iron. And the feet are made of iron and clay. That's the image. In the dream itself, then, we see a stone that smashes the image, and that stone grows into a mountain. All right, so if you're in Daniel chapter 2, I'm going to go ahead and start reading in verse 36. We'll read the interpretation. So Daniel chapter 2, verse 36, this was the dream, Daniel says. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he is given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. And just as you saw that a stone was cut from the mountain by no human hand, that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. So Daniel gives the interpretation of the dream. We can run through this on the slides and on the screen behind me. The head of gold of the image, that's where it all starts, that is Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel says so. I'm going to suggest to you that that's representing the Babylonian Empire, because everything after that is a kingdom. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar, of course, is the ruler of the Babylonian Empire, the kingdom at that particular time. He's the head of gold. Then after him, there'll be the section that is chest and arms that are made of silver. Because we've studied the history, we know who that is, right? Who is it? It's Persia, okay? There's a method to the madness. That's why we had all that history at the beginning of this class, because we need to know after Babylon comes Persia. Does Nebuchadnezzar know that? He has not a slight clue at all about the Persian Empire. He's thinking, my empire is going to last a really, really long time, okay? This dream tells him what he probably knows intuitively, and that is that your empire is not going to last forever. But he doesn't know who the next kingdom is going to be. We know because we look backwards. We have the benefit of hindsight. The chest and the arms of silver are indeed the Persian Empire. That's the next empire that's going to rule over this part of the world. They're going to take over what had been the Babylonian Empire. Following the Persian Empire, then, we have the middle and the thighs of bronze. Again, historically, we know who that is. Who is that? It's Greece, okay? Specifically, who is the leader of Greece when they accomplish this? Alexander the Great, okay? Again, that's why we talk about all that history at the beginning of the class. So Greece takes over by conquering the Persian Empire, which had conquered the Babylonian Empire, okay? Boy, we don't want that happening now, do we? That may have just knocked our live stream off. If it was enough to get rid of internet, that would be enough to get rid of our live stream. Who knows? We'll see. All right, so that's foreboding for tomorrow and Friday, isn't it? We do not want a repeat of that, no electricity. All right, so the middle and thighs are of bronze, that's Greece. Then we have the legs and the feet. Again, we know historically, even though we have not talked about it, we've talked about Rome in this class, but we haven't talked about the rise of Rome. But it is Rome that is going to take over this part of the world. They are going to replace the Greeks as the world power. They are represented by the legs and the feet. We also find in this, and this gets us to the New Testament period, then in the days of those kings, which kings? The Roman kings. God sets up his kingdom. It is established in those days. Now, I'm going to throw this out here for free because I emphasize this when I teach the book of Revelation. When you look at this prophecy is not fulfilled entirely when the church is established on the day of Pentecost. It is not, okay? And to say that it is basically cuts the legs, sorry for the pun there, off of that prophecy. Because the prophecy is not only that the stone is going to crush those empires, it's going to be an establishment of God's kingdom, but it is going to fill the whole world, okay? That takes place, that victory takes place when? Takes place later than that. It takes place when the Messiah's kingdom survives the attempt of the Roman Empire to destroy it. So today, does God's kingdom still exist? Yes. Where's the Roman Empire? Gone. You read about it in history books. Okay? God's kingdom smashed all the kingdoms to pieces and filled the earth. So the fulfillment of this prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 is not just in Acts chapter 2, it is also in the book of Revelation. And I think that is highly appropriate also when you consider how many parallels there are between the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Okay? So that is Daniel chapter 2. Any questions or comments about that? Caleb is chomping at the bit to bring that microphone to Aaron, who has a question or comment.
In what way was Persia inferior to Babylon? It lasted a whole lot longer and was a whole lot larger. But Daniel says it's inferior.
Well, okay, I'm going to answer that question. God said it was. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it was inferior certainly to the kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar had. I'm going to throw out there that God said it was inferior, so it must have been.
Here's my 2 cents real quick. We know that at least before Daniel chapter 5 with Belteshazzar and the handwriting on the wall, that Nebuchadnezzar repents in some form or fashion and humbles himself before God after being turned into a beast. So perhaps, not scripturally based in the most part, but perhaps Persia is inferior to Babylon because of Nebuchadnezzar's humbling before God and all of these kingdoms of men just being puffed up chests.
Perhaps, okay.
Just 2 cents.
That might be one way that it is. Nebuchadnezzar is an incredible ruler in his own right. It is true that you don't really get anybody in the book of Daniel until you get Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the next one that's mentioned. And Belshazzar doesn't hold a candle to his grandfather. So it may be inferior in that way, but I'm just going to have to take it on faith because God reveals it to Nebuchadnezzar and says it's going to be an inferior kingdom. Maybe, and going back to what Andrew over here said, maybe we tend to judge things based on externals. And God is seeing something else. And so God is saying that the next kingdom is going to be inferior.
Just like David. Remember? David was small, little. No one thought he could be king. He said, don't look on the outside.
Yes.
That's what God does throughout history.
Yeah. That's about the best answer I can give because if we're looking from a military standpoint, Persia conquers more territory. But they also don't hold on to the territory. Nebuchadnezzar reigns for a long time and holds on to his territory. It's his grandson that's going to lose it all. So, okay. You may not be satisfied with that, but it's the best I can give you, Aaron. Okay. Any other questions or comments? It's hard to find inferior when it's the conquering kingdom. I will grant that. Except that God says that it is. So somehow it was. All right. Any other questions about Daniel 2? Questions or comments? All right, then let's move on to our next one, which is Daniel chapter 7. So let me pull that slide up there as well. Daniel chapter 7. This is now out of the part of the book that we spend most of our time in, okay? So if you will take your Bibles and go to Daniel chapter 7, we're going to look at this chapter. It's 28 verses. We're going to go ahead and read it. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, okay? So not Nebuchadnezzar, but Belshazzar, all right? Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. And as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. And thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. Okay, so this vision takes place in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. We can pin that on our calendars about 553 BC. Okay, so considerably later than Daniel chapter 2. Daniel himself is the one that has the vision. his vision has 4 beasts. Those beasts are as follows: a lion with an eagle's wings, and then a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. Then we have a leopard with 4 bird wings and 4 heads. And then we have a 4th beast that is described as having 10 horns, and then with an 11th horn. Okay? The focus of this particular vision is on which beast? The 4th one. Okay? The focus is on the 4th one. All right. So these beasts have been illustrated in various ways. You can go online on the internet, look up Daniel chapter 7, the 4 beasts. You'll get a whole lot of representations. This is one that I use just for the sake of the class. So you have the lion there with the eagle wings, the leopard over there with the bird wings. You've got the bear there with 3 ribs in its mouth. And then behind that, you have the 4th beast. And that 4th beast gets described or gets illustrated in various ways because there aren't a whole lot of details in Daniel chapter 7 as to what he looks like. This particular artist chose to illustrate it as a dragon. I will tell you that that is probably coming out of the book of Revelation, because there are correspondences between Daniel chapter 7 and the book of Revelation. So probably that's where the author gets it, although it is not described as such in the book. It is described as being terrible, having claws and having horns. Okay? And the focus of this vision is on that beast. Let me pull up my slides a little bit. All right, so the next slide to look at, our interpretation. All right, well, it is given in Daniel chapter 7, verses 15 through 28 that we have already read. So we have some kingdoms here, and I'm just going to pull it all up at once. We have in Daniel chapter 2, Babylon, the head of gold, Persia, the chest and arms of silver, Greece, the middle and thighs of bronze, and Rome, the legs of and feet of iron and clay. In Daniel chapter 7, it's the exact same kingdoms described differently. So Babylon is the lion with wings, Persia is the bear, Greece is the leopard with wings, and then finally we have Rome again. That is the terrifying beast with 10 horns. And again, that is the focus of the vision. Daniel's really interested in that beast. Why? Why do you think he might be interested in that particular beast? What happens in the vision? What does the beast do in the vision?
Dominance in the world.
Dominance in the world and war against who? War against God's people. Okay? We call them Christians because we have hindsight. Daniel's mind, this is another world power that is waging war against the saints of God. All right? So he's interested in that beast. What is that beast all about? So let me pull up the next slide then. Again, the focus of the prophecy, this dream, and the interpretation is on the 4th beast, and particularly that 11th horn that makes war against the saints. Now, I'm going to give you my interpretation. You have it on your notes. In my view, Domitian is the 11th horn, okay? It was Domitian who was the first emperor to persecute God's people as a matter of state policy. Well, wait a minute. We've all heard about Nero, right? Nero's persecuting Christians, right? He is in the city of Rome. Nero's persecution never extends beyond the city of Rome and maybe its immediate area right around the city. It is not a matter of empire-wide policy. Christians have been persecuted under Roman governors here and there. Christians have been persecuted by mobs. But the first emperor who's going to come along and as a matter of state policy persecute Christians is Domitian. Now here's another point of contact. Who is the emperor when John receives the vision of Revelation? Domitian is. Okay? Domitian is the emperor that sits on the throne when God reveals to John the revelation. Okay? So it's Domitian at the head of the Roman Empire that is in view there in how God's people are being persecuted. I think the 11th horn is in fact Domitian. I take somewhat a literal approach towards the horns. Okay? And I freely admit that not all details should be taken literally, and not all are meant to be literal. You know that if you studied any kind of apocalyptic literature with me, okay? However, in spite of that, I will freely admit, or maybe because of that, I will freely admit that equating number 11 with Domitian may well be taking something literally that isn't meant to be, but at least in my mind, I see it pretty clearly, okay? That number 11 persecutes God's people, Daniel chapter 7. It's number 11 who persecutes God's people then in the New Testament, and that's recorded in the book of Revelation. And when you study the book of Revelation, you will see other things that are points of correspondence between Daniel chapter 7 and the vision that John receives. All right, so 11. Is he really 11? Well, let's look at our Caesars. So number 1 is Augustus. Wait a minute. Julius Caesar is the first Caesar, right? No, he's not. Julius Caesar, here's another irony of history. Julius Caesar is not the first Caesar, okay? He's not the first emperor, all right? It's Augustus that is the first emperor. Following him, we have Tiberius, then we have Caligula, then we have Claudius, then we have Nero, okay? Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero are all pretty well known. Then we have some lesser known fellas, Galba. Hardly anybody knows about this fella. Otho, same kind of thing. Then we have Vitellius, Vespasian. Now we start to get somebody who's well known. Because Vespasian, in addition to being emperor, before he was emperor, was what? He was a Roman general. What was he doing before he was emperor? Laying siege to Jerusalem, suppressing the Jewish revolt of 68 AD, which we will talk about in this class. Vespasian is followed on the throne by his son, whose name was Titus. And if you go to the city of Rome, one of the things you will almost certainly see in the city of Rome, if you miss this, go back to Rome, okay, because you missed what you really should have seen, which is the Arch of Titus, okay? You need to see the Arch of Titus. No, I have not seen it personally. If I ever get to Rome, I will most definitely see it. The Arch of Titus has some really interesting stuff in there. For example, there's the image of Roman soldiers carrying away the menorah out of the temple, because the Arch of Titus celebrates the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? So that's Titus. Then we have Domitian. Domitian is the 11th emperor. Domitian is from the same family as Vespasian and Titus, and he's number 11. Vespasian doesn't persecute Christians. Titus doesn't persecute Christians, not as any kind of a matter of state policy. Nero persecutes Christians, by the way. Why? He needs a scapegoat. There's the Great Fire of Rome that burns a whole lot of property. Also happened to be property where Nero planned to build some things. And people began to be suspicious that maybe Nero had actually set that fire himself. By the way, he probably did, or had it, not himself, but had it set. Well, now people are blaming me. So what does Nero do? I got to put the blame on someone else. And nobody really likes the Christians anyways. They're goody two-shoes. And so we'll just blame it on them. And that's how that all comes about in the city of Rome. I don't want to minimize how many Christians die in that persecution, but it's not empire-wide. Okay? It's very limited. Domitian comes along and he says, I want everybody to worship me as a god. And I mean that seriously. All of these Roman emperors technically, in Roman eyes, were gods. But most of them didn't really care if the people worshiped them. Domitian wanted people to worship him. Okay? And the Christians would not. And so the stage was set for conflict between these two parties. Okay? Let's see, can I get that to come up? There we go. So there we have a bust of Domitian and another image of that 11th horn from that artist. Okay? I think Domitian is the 11th horn. I think that's what's being talked about in Daniel chapter 7. If you want to take exception to that, freely admit that I could be wrong, but based on my study of Daniel, based on my study of Revelation, and based on my study of history, that's where I come out. Okay? Any questions about Daniel 7? We're actually going to do this. Maybe. Wait, let's come up for the mic. Got to have the mic. If it's not on the mic, it didn't happen.
Yeah, I agree with it, but did you come up with any kind of conflicting to your take on it? Any conflicting information to the 11?
Possibly, but I don't pay attention to the conflicting information. You know, a lawyer doesn't present the evidence for the other side, right? The only thing sometimes that people question is you have Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. Those are the three emperors that reigned really, really briefly, and then they're replaced by Vespasian. Okay? And so you have Domitian. If he's the 11th horn, the text says that he knocked down 3 emperors. Well, he didn't knock down Titus and Vespasian, all right? But that dynasty, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, did knock down basically those 3 emperors. Okay? Those were the 3 that followed. They were in quick succession. I think they all reigned within 1 year. Very short reign in the Roman Empire. And then you have the next dynasty, which starts out with Vespasian ruling on the throne. So that is at least, so I wouldn't call it a difficulty, because in apocalyptic literature speaks that way. But that sometimes is raised as an objection.
Yeah, you kind of answered what I was going to comment about, was the horn coming out and removing 3 of the horns with the previous comment. So all good here.
Okay. And again, and this kind of goes to the point of whether the 11th should be taken literally or not. It is apocalyptic literature. Okay. Daniel chapter 7 is thoroughly apocalyptic. Daniel chapter 8 is thoroughly apocalyptic. And so we have to be careful with that. But again, based on the points of correspondence between that and the book of Revelation and history, that's where I come out. Okay. Other people come out in different places. But again, I don't provide evidence for the other side. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, let's move to Daniel chapter 8 then. So go ahead and take your Bibles and go to Daniel chapter 8. We're going to be reading here quite a bit of material. But just to set the stage, this does take place in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So Daniel chapter 7 is in 553. Daniel chapter 8 is in 550. That's a 3-year difference. Okay? Belshazzar is still the Babylonian king, at least for now. He's the last one. But he's not first in the kingdom, is he? He's second in the kingdom. Remember when we talked about Babylonian Empire? His father basically says, you handle things here, I'm going out to the oasis and meditate. Okay? So Belshazzar is basically functioning as king, even though he's not actually first in power. Remember in Daniel chapter 6, he offers whoever can interpret the handwriting on the wall, which place in the kingdom? 3rd, because that's the best he can do. He can't offer him 2nd, he's 2nd. So he offers him 3rd. Okay? All right, it's that Belshazzar. All right, let's go ahead and read the chapter then. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him. There was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him, and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. All right, so this particular vision is more limited in scope. It's limited in scope to 2 empires. And we know exactly which empires, because Daniel's told, okay? And he writes that down for us, all right? The ram in the vision is the Persian Empire, has 2 horns. They represent the Persians, the Medes, and the Persians, okay? So the ram is the Persian Empire. Then we have the male goat. That's Greece. We know that because the text tells us that, all right? The male goat comes from the west, and indeed, he did. That's the direction that Alexander would come from. He traveled quickly without touching the ground, okay? Is that literal or figurative? It's figurative, but it describes a literal truth. Alexander's conquests are so incredibly lightning fast. As a matter of fact, the only thing I can think of that is somewhat a parallel is what Hitler does when he finally starts World War II by invading Poland. At that point in time, it's just victory after victory until he meets up with the Russian winter, and that's kind of the end of that. That's the kind of conqueror that Alexander the Great is, okay? And so it's as if he's going so fast his feet aren't even touching the ground, all right? You can visualize that, can't you? Maybe a horse that's running so fast that you can hardly see its feet on the ground, or a runner running that fast. So that's how this goat is able to conquer. He tramples the ram, but when he is strong, the conspicuous horn is broken. Now I want y'all to remember, this is in 550 BC. It is over 200 years before Alexander will do any of this. And here it is described in detail. In fact, what liberal viewers of the Bible have said is this had to be written after the fact. Daniel cannot date to this period because there is no way he could ever write prophecies that detailed before they happened. We know better, right? Because it is God who reigns in the kingdoms of men. And if he tells Daniel this is what he's going to do, this is what he's going to do. And in fact, it is what he does. So at the height of the empire's power, Alexander dies. Suddenly, unexpectedly, either from a fever or from poison. Still don't know that question historically, okay? And whew, now what? Now what do you do? Okay? When the ruler dies like that, there's got to be a plan. Alexander, what was your plan? He didn't have one. So what's going to happen? Remember all that history? It divides up into 4. Eventually, when the dust settles, you get 4 kingdoms. How many kingdoms does Daniel record? 4. Okay? So Daniel already knows in advance what God is going to do. Right? So, another image from that same artist, just for illustration. There you got your goat with that one big horn hitting the ram with its 2, and the goat's going to win. Okay? All right. So, again, it's limited in scope. Males, great. Here we go. This is the new bullet point. So, 4 horns. The 4 horns are the 4 main successor states, the Diadochi. Macedonia, that's Antipater, then Cassander. Thrace, that's Lysimachus. Egypt, those are the Ptolemies. And Asia, Macedonia, those are the Seleucids. And it is out of that last kingdom that a little horn comes. Now, because you studied the history, who is the little horn? Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes. It is he who will wage war against God's people. It is he who will desecrate the temple. It is he who will stop the sacrifices. We know that because we have hindsight. Daniel doesn't know who that is, but he knows it's going to be out of this kingdom. He knows it's going to be out of Greece. We have the benefit of hindsight. And again, that's why we spend so much time on history at the beginning of this class, because otherwise we don't have the foundation for understanding what's happening in these chapters. All right, so the little horn, again, Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes, okay? He grows great towards the south, that's Egypt. Towards the east, that's Mesopotamia, and the glorious land, that's Judea. That's where the Jews live. This is the area of Seleucid rule, and it describes it to a T. Antiochus the 4th considered himself to be deity. He took this seriously. He put it on his coins. He expected people to worship him. He expected the Jews to worship him. That was part of the reason why they went to war. The Maccabees and the Hasmoneans. We talked about that. He overthrows the sanctuary, verses 11 through 12, and he institutes the transgression that makes desolate, verse 13. That is a phrase as well that shows up in 2 other places in the New Testament. I will give you one revelation. Someone give me the other. Don't look at your cross references in your Bible. Matthew chapter 24. When Jesus gives a description of the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? In Daniel, it concerns that destruction. In Matthew, it concerns that destruction. In Revelation, it's no longer the destruction of the Jerusalem temple because the Jerusalem temple isn't there anymore. It's gone. Okay? But John takes that terminology and uses it, and it gets a different meaning. All right. We've already had our first bell, so I need to move us through this, just through the end of it. All right. So Daniel chapter 2. Overall vision stretching to the Roman era and the establishment and victory of the kingdom. Daniel chapter 7, again, it's an overall vision stretching to the Roman Empire, the Roman era, and emphasizing the persecution of God's people. Daniel chapter 8 is specific to events between Greece and Persia, but emphasizing the actions of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. By the way, remember how Antiochus dies? Eaten alive by worms, rotting. It's like gangrene, okay? What does Daniel chapter 8 say about how Antiochus is going to die? Verse 25. He shall be broken, but by no human hand. Hard to get much more specific than that, short of saying he's going to be eaten by worms, okay? In other words, Antiochus IV is not going to die because someone's going to kill him so they can take the throne. It's God doing this to him. And when you compare that to how Herod is killed in the New Testament, remember in the book of Acts, he doesn't give the glory to God. An angel strikes him and he is what? Eaten by worms. This appears to be one of God's methods for dealing with those who seek to glorify themselves rather than Him. All right, Sunday morning, we are going to get in before that bell rings. Sunday morning, we're going to talk about Daniel's prophecies of the period, not number 1, but number 2. Okay? Aaron?
Quick question.
All right.
In terms of Antiochus IV, I know that's how I would understand, I would agree with you, and most Christian authors do. Do Jewish people understand that's also about Antiochus IV? Do you know?
I don't know if they understood it at the time. If they did, it would have had to have been recorded in 1st and 2nd Maccabees.
Do they now?
Oh, do they now? No, I don't know. I don't know whether they do now or not. I don't know. I can imagine what they might do in interpreting that. They might interpret with a literal interpretation and then figurative after that, but I don't know that for a fact, so I'm just going to have to leave it at that. All right? Any other questions or comments? All right, so I'm going to say this because I don't get to be in the pulpit again this evening. Y'all all be safe tomorrow, okay? Don't go out if you don't have to. Stay at home. Read a book. Some of us work at home, so we're going to work anyways, okay? But don't go out in that mess if you don't have to tomorrow. Schools have mostly already canceled. Keller canceled. Northwest canceled, so I think that's probably reasonable. Unfortunately, in years past, some of our members have been in car accidents in weather like that, and so I just stay home, drink a cup of hot chocolate or coffee, all right? Thank y'all.